Hi, my name is Kevin and I collect old irons. Over the course of these videos we wish to meet some of the various historical personalities and collectors of old irons. We have already met the person that I think is internationally the most important person among old irons, and that is Mrs. M. Florence Potts. Today we're going to meet the person I think is the second most important personality in designs and marketing of irons, and at least in the time before the electric era. And that is Nelson R. Streeter. Nelson R. Streeter was a businessman and inventor with drive and ambition, a real entrepreneur. Of course, the American woods in those latter 1800s were full of such people, but Nelson paid particular interest to the pressing irons, and he was associated with them, a wide variety of these irons, over 45 years, from the early 1870s to his death in 1917. Streeter's irons are also important because the group has been well documented. Rick Tyler, a noted iron collector who has also consulted surviving records from the Streeter family, provides dates and manufacturers for most of the early variants. Such information is not generally available for most of the old irons, which may typically have a patent and little else to gauge dates in history. If you're interested in learning more about this subject, you should consult his papers in Pressing News, and there is a pending self-published book on the topic. I am here just giving an overview. Over his 45 years in the iron business, Nelson Streeter marketed two important series of irons. The first of these I call the magic irons. These irons were slug or detachable handles, also included hand and combination fluters, and by and large they came with stands that had a depressed area in which you could insert a slug, and these read the N.R. Streeter's Magic Fluter and Polisher, patented September 1876. These stands are very common in the United States and Canada, and these were used in the mid-1870s to late 1880s. The second series of Streeter irons was the sensible irons, which were largely detachable handle irons, which he marketed from 1887 to his death in 1917, so for 30 years. These were generally based on the sensible trivet, which came in various sizes. Rick Tyler and I have cataloged about 15 variants of the magic and sensible irons in a paper that will soon be coming out in Pressing News. Nelson started his business life in the 1860s, working up through the ranks in a shoe business based in Groton, New York. Nelson was quite talented and something of a self-taught Renaissance man. He liked to sing and act in the upstate New York community theaters and wrote poetry. This was a time when the country was full of poets. The daily newspaper would include poems as filler, and this was also true for trade magazines and even scientific journals. Nelson published poetry in the American Commercial Traveler, a magazine for traveling salesmen who are known as drummers. We still use the phrase drumming up business. Nelson Streeter was one of those foot soldiers of small business capitalism. This photo shows a traveling businessman with his traveling case of salesman samples. The case was then known as a grip. The term still sees some use today. Nelson in 1889 compiled his and some other poems into a book, Gems from an Old Drummer's Grip. The drummer's grip is again a reference to the salesman's bag of items for sale. We will talk about the old iron salesman samples that the drummer might carry at another time. Streeter had patents for shoe lasts, animal traps, and other things, and started marketing his own inventions in the 1870s. One invention was this vegetable and meat chopper. He sold a bunch of these. You can find these quite readily on eBay. There's one on eBay right now for $12.95. Streeter's first irons, from about 1874, were hand fluters. The early 1870s was a golden age for fluting irons, and every inventor and foundry was churning these things out. Streeter's initial fluter consisted of a base plate with handle, and I gotta say, I think the base plate was best and most efficiently heated directly on the stove. But Streeter had that base plate instead on a box that included a slug. Slug irons were very, very popular in Europe, and I think that he was advertising this along with the very stylish, well-built handle system as something with greater class. The handle reads the sensible fluter, and Streeter really liked the sensible term. He used it sporadically in his early irons, but from 1887 onward he put sensible on practically every iron he made. As we've seen earlier, combination irons were very popular in the 1870s, and for his first irons that he's going to build, he turns his eye to these. This is an early example from the mid-1870s. It is a detachable handle iron. The bottom is a slug iron. There's a slug in here. It lists on a hinge. The top has a fluter plate, and so you could either use this as an iron, or you can use it as your base plate and use the separate handle attachment to flute. This iron was the beginning of a series of irons that I call the magic irons. This iron leads to another very similar iron. The iron that I have here, let me take the handle off again, has, reading across the top, the N.R. Streeter Magic Fluter and Polisher iron, and that matches the design that's on the stand as well. And that's what gives the term magic to the series here. Again, there is a hinge on the front, a slug inside. You might note that this particular one design has a latch on the back, whereas this one has a latch on the front. And that's one of the earmarks of the Streeter irons, is that he tended to improve and do different varieties every year. Now, to make this as a combination fluter, I'm going to take the handle off again, and I'm going to put a fluter plate that fits nicely on top of this. And now, using my hand unit, I can make a fluter iron out of this, or I can, and here is another base with a slug that I can insert on top of the base, and putting this over here, I can flute with this unit. And again, Streeter had all kinds of different variants and ideas, adding to them each year, but they were all interchangeable, and together they presented a group of irons that more sophisticated housewives wanted to own. The irons I have here are for the next step in the series, and that is the Magic number 1. And I have a latch here, and I want you to notice here that the entire top plate comes off. So there is no hinge. There is, again, a slug within here. And there is quite a number of variations on these. They have different kinds of latches. This one has a lift latch, otherwise the same basic design. And between the years 1880 and 1886, there may well have been 7 different latch designs. And these also are combination fluters, because I have here a base plate and another roller top, the roller top here being slightly different, and that fits right there, and there we are. So once again, a combination fluting iron system. I will again use the previous iron by way of comparison. There are numerous kinds of latches. This particular one, you turn around this way and it moves a plate backwards, and that allows you to unlatch the top, and that is the first of the Magic number 1s. And Streeter also did some polishing irons, and there's also a litany of different types there, and this may be among the very first of these. In fact, Rick Tyler thinks this is probably a prototype. It might be a pre-production model to test the market, but again, you turn this and then you lift the top off. There is a slug in here. It's a polishing iron. It's got a rounded bottom. And he marketed these as the Laundry Queen. Say a little bit about values. The irons of the general type here are in the 50 to maybe $100 or more dollars. The Laundry Queen polishing irons are much rarer and probably in the 200, maybe something more than that realm. And there was a similar small iron called the Gem, which I consider to be a hat iron. It has a very rounded front. This is a photo from Rick Tyler that shows the top, slug, and base. Note that there's a little wooden knob on the latch. Here's an example of another Gem iron. This one has an earlier latch and a different rear end from the previous. This one came up on eBay recently and went for $371. Twice what Rick and I both thought this would go for. The reason, I think, is that the hatters have discovered the hatter irons and they have driven up the prices. So here for comparison again is a late model Magic number 1. This one has the latch that lifts here to remove the top. Again, this one has a slug. But by the mid 1850s, the slug irons are really starting to become unpopular. It's much easier to heat a larger weight directly without having to insert the slug, and so what Streeter did was took that basic design and produced what he called a sensible. Same lift mechanism here, but this has a single piece unit. And he called this the sensible iron. I call this the magic sensible because again it's part of that magic group, and we're going to see momentarily a whole litany of sensible irons in the next group. And this is a combination iron. We can take our slug here, or take our fluter plate and our roller plate here, and we can do some fluting, or we can take any number of other gadgets that he had. This is a handle with an add-on roller top that we can put on here as well. So there was all kinds of different versions here. There are quite a number of these fluter attachment versions, and they are much sought after. Let me just show you this one. This is from one of the earlier designs. You have a fluter base that you can disattach here. This is a magic bottom, and I can, got to put it in right, one moment. There's another top, and endless variations of these. In the late 1880s, Streeter more or less discontinued the Magic line, and starting with a September 6, 1887 patent, he marketed a whole new series of irons. These were simple, rugged, with a heavy front latch, but he retained a sensible name, and he applied that to all of his subsequent irons. So, the Sensibles. This is a diverse and very common group of detachable handle irons. They come in all kinds of different sizes. Small ones tend to be double pointed. Here's another double pointed with a nice little sensible trivet. His mid-sized irons tend to have flat backs, and I don't have one of these to show. And then there was the Goose iron class. This is a 20-pounder, and these went up to 26 pounds, but the same sensible type handle. And the sensible line included various other irons as well. This is a gem polisher again. It's got an edge here for polishing surface. Again, it has the very typical sensible detachable handle. And then there was a number of different sized sleeve irons as well. Just so you know, these are extremely common, $20, $25 maybe. These might be $75, $100 or more dollars. So the sensible irons, by and large, have a detachable handle with the base being a single block of iron. But in about 1900, the Dover company marketed a series called Dover or asbestos irons, and this is a subject for another video some other time, but the Dover irons had a asbestos lining on the inside of the shield, and that lining acted as an insulation to keep separate the heating this up from the top where your hands might be. And this was very popular. And so Streeter, always willing to adapt to the market, came up with a sensible iron that was sort of similar. Again, it is a sensible, it's got a base plate here, the handle reaches into that base plate, but this is all a single unit. There is no separate shield. The base and asbestos lining in here is all together, and he marketed that as an improvement over the Dover asbestos irons, which tended to wear and to break more readily. So this was his last patent. He continued with this and marketing various of his other irons as well until he died in 1917. Nelson Streeter died at the age of 79 years old. With his death, Colebrook Foundry took over his line of irons and marketed them for some years yet. I thank you for the opportunity to talk about these irons. We will have more iron categories to talk about and some more personalities as well. We will see you again.